The vast majority of the Dragon Ball series was not planned at all. In fact, this franchise might be one of the biggest and most successful examples of making shit up as you go along as a storyteller. Like, at least 90% of it is just Toriyama coming up with an idea, executing it, and then figuring out how that idea might tie in with things that happened before and things that might come after as he's writing it chapter to chapter. This is not a meticulously planned series where Toriyama sat down and decided from chapter 1 that Majin Buu is going to appear 400 chapters later. That's not what happened. But that being said, Toriyama is also not a guy who completely makes things up as he goes along 100% of the time. There are very obviously seeds sown in earlier arcs that are paid off later on. The first big example I can name is Kami and Piccolo being aliens in the 23rd Budokai, which doesn't get a payoff until they fight Vegeta and Nappa quite a few chapters afterward. And another big idea, which also creates the big topic of this video, is the passing of the torch from Goku and I guess kind of like the older generation to Gohan, Goten, and Trunks. A huge portion of the Buu arc is devoted to giving these guys the focus. They're the ones who are very much involved in a lot of the things that are happening. They're the ones who are counted on to save the world. And it's usually their stuff that takes just as much, if not more, precedent than other matters. And even the context of the Buu arc itself very clearly shows you that this is supposed to be a storyline where the kids are gonna take the adult's job and save the world. The Earthling warriors like Ten Shinhan, Yamcha, Krillin, they're all retired and old and outclassed. Same thing with Piccolo. Vegeta is killed about a third of the way in, so he can't help, obviously. Goku can help to a certain extent, but his time on Earth is spent, and so he can't actively fight the bad guy like he could before. And so this just kind of leaves it up to the kids to save the world. And this is very obviously the direction that the story is taking it. The fact that Gotenks is basically the main character for a good amount of time, and he's the one fighting the main villain, he's the one making things happen, is proof of that. And it's executed actually pretty decently. I don't really like Gotenks as a character, and I am growing to dislike the fusion concept in general the more and more time passes on, but kudos to Gotenks versus Super Buu for actually being a halfway decent fight, and Gotenks as a character fits Toriyama's sensibilities when it comes to a main character in Dragon Ball, which is probably one of the reasons why he was able to stick around with Gotenks instead of trying to swerve it back into Goku while the Gotenks portion was going on. See, what I mean by Toriyama's sensibility is that Toriyama views Goku, and I would say by proxy a lot of other Dragon Ball characters, as inherently selfish people who don't do things to do the right thing, but due to their actions and the consequences of those actions, they inadvertently save the day and do good things as a result of their selfish actions. And when you look at the series as a whole, that really is a good description for the vast majority of the characters. That's a good description of Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo to a point, kinda Krillin also up to a point. Gotenks, despite the fact that Buu has, killed a lot of members of his family and that kind of stuff and most of the planet, he's still a cocky little kid who wants to beat Buu so that he can stroke his own ego. And this brings us to the character whose sensibilities most diverge from the norm, and that is Gohan. Gohan, while being a martial artist and being someone who enjoys martial arts, he's not a dude who actually likes to fight for his life. He doesn't like the big stakes. He doesn't like the fact that the world is constantly being threatened, that people he cares about might potentially die, and he fights because he wants to protect those people. He has more kind of, let's call it generic quote-unquote anime character sensibilities over Goku and various other characters who fight because they want to test themselves or they want to stroke their own ego or mostly do things out of selfish desires. Though there are some fan theories that say Gohan has a different kind of selfishness that's fundamentally different from the other characters. I'm not really going to get into that here. Maybe I'll do a video on it later, but that's not really the point. Gohan is different from his dad. He has different motivations driving him, and he has to be written differently. And when Toriyama actually got around to writing Gohan as the main character, I very much suspect that he didn't just have a good time doing it. He probably found Gohan kind of boring, kind of bland, that he didn't really fit into what Dragon Ball is supposed to be, and that's why I believe that he switched back to Goku very, very quickly. Which kinda wasn't entirely a bad thing, because the climax of the Buu arc is a really, really damn good. It's very satisfying. It's really cool to see Goku and Vegeta cooperate for the very first time before it became an annoying, obnoxiously stale relationship that you don't want to ever see again. A lot of the antics with Mr. Satan and Buu were really fun. Kid Buu versus Super Saiyan 3 Goku was really cool. And of course, the Spirit Bomb climax, while already done to death in a lot of the movies, was executed probably the best it's ever been. And yet, despite this very satisfying and very fun climax to the story, the decision to switch away from Gotenks and Gohan over to Goku and Vegeta remains a very polarizing one to this very day, if not outright very unpopular in certain circles of the fandom. Even people who don't really dive into the story of Dragon Ball that much and don't really try to dissect it, notice how it all feels kinda off. And for very understandable reasons, because the majority of the Buu arc is all about the next generation kinda learning, powering up, so that they can stop this ultimate evil, and then in the 11th hour, they just kinda decide, nah, you guys suck, you're incompetent, you're losers, we gotta get your dads to come and save you, and you're not even gonna participate in, like, fighting Kid Buu the way Goku kinda suggests that they might. Which, in hindsight, could have been some kind of a nice little olive branch to throw, but this is a whole thing that was written out over 20 years ago, so it's kind of a moot point. And it also doesn't help, besides the thematic reasons, that when Toriyama wrote Gohan as the MC, he did a really shitty job of it. He kind of writes Gohan like Vegeta when he's fighting Super Buu. He's very, you know, smirking and cocky and arrogant. He's even using more offensive speech than he usually does. He doesn't really have any of Gohan's usual personality. He's just kind of boring and bland. And it's all kind of Toriyama's fault in that instance. He's the guy who wrote him that way, and he kind of just made the situation worse for himself. If he wrote Gohan a little bit better, maybe the whole idea of Gohan being the main protagonist wouldn't have been so unappealing to him. And on an audience level, there's also the fact that when Gohan shows up as Ultimate, he just beats the shit out of Super Buu, once again leading us into another boring one-sided curb stomp, after Gotenks vs Super Buu was a fairly evenly balanced fight, with these two throwing in lots of really crazy shit at each other to see who's gonna win. And so just having Gohan beat up Super Buu with regular punches and kicks is nowhere near as interesting for us the audience, and probably nowhere near as fun for Toriyama to write. But once again, I can't really excuse him, much like I can't excuse the Gohan characterization, because he's the one who decided to write it this way, and I suspect he made things that he probably wasn't super comfortable about somewhere in the back of his head, all the more problematic for him writing it down. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Buu arc's swerve when it came to the main characters. It leads to some really cool stuff, but it's easily one of the most glaring examples of Toriyama not knowing how to write himself out of a corner and doing it in a very half-assed, very haphazard fashion. It could have absolutely been done well. In fact, you could have just kept Gohan and Gotenks as the main characters and just concluded the Buu arc that way, because we know the Buu arc was already the end of Dragon Ball, so it's not like he would have had to write another big mega storyline with someone he doesn't like as the MC being the MC. But that's all coulda, woulda, shoulda.